Hey everybody, Michael the Librarian of Magic here, finding and cataloging the magical and pointing you to it. I have returned to give my impressions of the season finale of The Mandalorian, Episode 8, called Redemption. And it's a packed episode. It's the longest one of the season, I believe, at like 45 minutes plus. I have a lot of notes here, so I'm going to dive right in. As always, this is going to be spoilery. If you've watched any of my videos, you probably know that by now. So I'm just going to jump right in with my impressions and thoughts as I give a recap of the season finale of The Mandalorian. This episode was directed by Taika Waititi, who voices IG-11 in the show, who was also the director of a bunch of movies recently like Jojo Rabbit and Thor Ragnarok, and has, been sort of working a lot lately. So this episode, and he does a great job in this. He has a good, he understands a good blend of action and humor, which I think is a nice tone for Star Wars. He proved that he has those sort of capabilities when he made Thor Ragnarok. This episode begins with the scout troopers who killed Kuiil the Ugnaught and retrieved the Yodeling, the asset, to bring him back to bring the baby back to the city. And it kind of starts with this funny exchange where they have the child in a burlap sack, and they're sitting on their speeder bikes. They kind of phone in on their comms to ask if it's appropriate for them to be in the city, and the guys on the other end tell them they need to wait a minute because Gideon's dealing with the Mandalorian and all that stuff, and he's super angry and unhinged. So they have this really funny conversation where they make a bunch of funny jokes and references. The troopers are voiced by Adam Pally and Jason Sudeikis, and they do sort of like a funny improv. They make fun of the fact that troopers are notoriously bad shots, and they try to use their blaster pistols to shoot at something on the ground, and they both miss egregiously, and there's funny stuff there. They're getting annoyed with the yodeling, so they're like punching the bag and hitting it and stuff. And then eventually IG-11, the reprogrammed, repurposed droid, shows up because his imperative is now to nurse and protect the child, and just demolishes these guys and takes the child back into its care. Then we cut back to our heroes, the Mandalorian, Cara Dune, and Greef Karga, being pinned down in this bar or whatever. And the Mandalorian discovers with his sensors that there is a vent on one side of the room that they could escape through, but they can't figure out how to get the vent off. They don't have the power necessary to get that off. So they're pinned down, and they don't know how they're going to escape this room, and Gideon knows that he has them stuck. He sets up what's called an E-Web, which is like this giant gun, basically, a repeating rifle that he sets up, has all these troopers set up in front of the building, and says, look, I'm going to only give you a certain amount of time till nightfall, which is coming soon, to give yourselves up, or else I'm just going to blast this place apart. The reason I believe he's giving them a little bit of time is because he doesn't have the child in his possession yet. I believe he knows or thinks that he knows that those troopers brought it back, but he's not 100% sure because it's not actually in his possession, so he's waiting a little bit of time, but he's fixing to blast the Mandalorian and everybody right out of that building. And then in sort of making this speech about how they only have a certain amount of time and he's gonna blast them out, there's like this huge exposition dump where every answer to every question practically that I've been wanting in this show, he just delivers all at once. And like this thing that I had to go back and watch again and reread about, because he gives you all this information where he tells you the Mandalorian's name is Din Djarin, who is a decommissioned Mandalorian in Moff Gideon's words. He points out that he knows who Cara Dune is, and that she is a native of Alderaan before Alderaan was destroyed by the Death Star. And he also notes that he knows who Greef Karga is, and that Karga is a disgraced magistrate of some sort. And the Mandalorian also recognizes Moff Gideon. He thought that Moff Gideon was executed by the New Republic for war crimes, but obviously he wasn't because he's there. So there's some sort of story behind that. And then we get the full flashback of the Mandalorian's home planet being taken out by the Separatist droid army during the Clone Wars, and his parents being shot up by droids, and his parents try to hide him in this bunker, and then when his parents get shot up, he's rescued just in the nick of time. He's about to be shot by this droid, and he's rescued just in the nick of time by this Mandalorian, and this whole group of Mandalorians fly down in their jetpacks. And we know from their sigils, if you're eagle-eyed and hardcore about it, that they're all from a clan called, or group that's based on a clan called Clan Vizsla, and a group called Death Watch that are a Mandalorian group from that era. If you want to know more about that, there are some story arcs in the Clone Wars animated show that give you a lot more information about Death Watch and Clan Vizsla, but there's definitely connections in this show to that. The character that was voiced by Jon Favreau in Episode 3, The Sin of The Mandalorian, was also a Vizsla of some sort, and then Jon Favreau also voiced a character called Pre-Vizsla in the Clone Wars, who's related to all this stuff, Clan Vizsla and Death Watch and all of that stuff. Who were sort of like an offshoot of Mandalorians that were like eventually became political dissidents and disagreed with the leadership on Mandalore and all that stuff. So there's a ton of that stuff that's tied into this. Dave Filoni was heavily involved in the writing of the Clone Wars and directing the story arcs and all of that stuff, and all of that is being connected into this. So there are some deep references going on in this show about connections to other shows, and not just the Star Wars films, but the TV shows as well, and novels and all of that kind of stuff. So that's kind of what's going on with that flashback in a sense. And because of all of that, they show all that the flashback stuff, and they surmise, or the Mandalorian reveals the only way he would have known his actual name is because his name, his real name was stored in records on Mandalore when he was adopted by the Mandalorians after being rescued when his planet was destroyed, or when his planet was invaded. And the only way that Moff Gideon could have known his name or information is if he was part of the Imperial detail in their secret police when the Empire took over Mandalore, and he would have had access to those records if he was in that detail unit. So the Mandalorian kind of like surmises all of that about Moff Gideon. As they're trying to figure all this stuff out, IG-11 arrives on the scene with the child in tow, and there's like this really amazing action sequence. It goes on for a little bit where he, like, all those stormtroopers that are setting up the E-Web and with Moff Gideon and all that stuff, IG-11 just starts mowing all these guys down, going into full, like, bounty hunter droid mode, and, like, has the child on his chest in, like, a Baby Bjorn sort of situation, and he's, like, rotating the child around and rotating his guns around, protecting the kid, and simultaneously, like, shooting all these stormtroopers, and the Mandalorian and Cara Dune and Greef Karga take that as their cue to come out of their hidey hole for a little bit and start helping him blast up a bunch of people. And then, as all of that firefighting is going on, Moff Gideon is on the scene, and he takes a calculated shot at the Mandalorian and, like, wings him in the neck area. So the Mandalorian gets seriously wounded. And then Gideon decides to fire on the E-Web thing because the Mandalorian's about to use it against the everybody, the stormtroopers and everybody, and the Moff Gideon shoots the, like, fuel cell of that and explodes it, and, like, the Mandalorian gets thrown off. And so Cara Dune pulls the Mandalorian from the battlefield and pulls him back into the place where the building where they originally were in, and starts seeing if she can tend to his wounds. She wants to take his helmet off because she needs to help him, and he refuses because that is the way. He tells her he never takes his helmet off. He's never taken his helmet off in front of another human being since he's had it on, and he would rather die, basically. Like, he admit, leave me alone, let me have a warrior's death, go on, save the child, save yourself, etc. And then eventually they all get pinned back down in the building. IG-11 and the child and Cara Dune end up, Karga, they all fall back. And then once they get nested back in there, they get pinned down back in there, Gideon tells a flame trooper to burn them all out. And so this guy comes in with a big flamethrower and basically, in order to buy them time, so IG-11, they tell him, like, we can escape through this vent, but we need a minute. Or IG-11 can use his droid, tech to burn his way through the grate so they can escape through the sewers. And but this flame guy comes in to burn the building down, basically, and the yodeling uses his force power to basically stop the flames from encroaching and, like, push them all back so that flamethrower guy gets, like, exploded. But that drains the yodeling, so the child can't use his healing abilities to heal the Mandalorians because he's drained from protecting them all. So the Mandalorian says, leave me, I'm going to die a warrior's death, take the child, take care of him. Once IG-11 gets the grate off, go down into the sewers. And IG-11 agrees to stay with the Mandalorian while the others escape down into the sewers. And IG-11 says, I can treat you and save you, but you have to take your helmet off. And the Mandalorian says no. Of course, he has problems with droids, and also he says, I've never taken it off in front of a living thing. And the droid says, well, I've never been living. So reluctantly, he allows IG-11 to take his helmet off so that IG-11 can administer medicine and save his life. And we do at that point see the Mandalorian's face for a brief scene. And surprisingly, Pedro Pascal looks like Pedro Pascal, but with battle fatigue. But yeah, so they, we as an audience get to see him, and they sort of cleverly make it so that, like, he doesn't violate his code, but we all get a flash of what he looks like. And I kind of hope that, like, even though I don't think this was necessary, I would have been perfectly fine with them never revealing the face of the Mandalorian. I wasn't, like, annoyed that they showed his face either. But I do kind of hope that, like, they hardly ever show him again, or very, very, very sparingly, because now that we've seen what he looks like, it doesn't really matter if we see him again, if he keeps up his code and all that stuff. Like, they figured out a clever way to do that without him violating his code, so I think that's kind of interesting. So anyway, IG-11's able to carry him down into the sewers and reunite with everybody, and he hasn't broken the code, and he has his helmet back on and stuff like that. Then when they're in the sewer, they use the sewer system to find the old Mandalorian enclave, which, existed before in the earlier episodes, and the Armorer is still there. And she talks about how when everything went down back in the episode The Sin, and all of those Mandalorians came out of hiding to save Din, they were all attacked. Their enclave was raided by the Imperials or ex-Imperials or whatever you want to call them. And there's this big stack of Mandalorian armor and helmets that the Armorer is, like, reforging and repurposing because, like, a lot of the Mandalorians died, and the rest that didn't die escaped, and she's the only person left on the planet because she feels like she has unfinished business there, and that's the way of their clan or whatever. So they have this conversation with her. She wants to see why Din made all of these sacrifices and what the hubbub is. So she wants to meet the child that he stuck his neck out for. And she meets him, and she explains, he explains about what happened with the Mudhorn on, we figure out the planet that where the Ugnaught was from and where the child was found is called Arvala 7. And he explains about the Mudhorn incident and how the child has powers. And she explains, yes, he has powers similar to the powers of the Jedi, and that the Jedi were, an ancient sect that were warring against the Mandalorians in the old times and stuff. She explains all of that stuff to the Mandalorian. And she tells him that it's the way of their clan that he's now charged with returning this child to figure out where its people are from, and helping him reunite. And if he can't do that, or in the meanwhile before he can, he's this child's father. That they are united as a clan, so they belong in a clan together. And she says, "You're now a clan of two." And she says he's also earned his clan sigil, so she gives him a sigil that she welds onto his pauldron, onto his shoulder piece, and it's the head of a mudhorn, and it's like that I thought was really cool, the sigil of like the mudhorn, and that's the symbol of their clan, because that's how they became united in the first place. And they're now a clan of two, the little child and Mandalorian, until, or if ever, he can find where this child comes from and reunite him with his people. And if not, they're in their own little clan. So that was kind of a cool thing. She also gives the Mandalorian a jetpack, because he's earned it as well, and that's sort of like the last step in becoming a full Mandalorian in his clan or whatever. So she gives him a jetpack as well. That's the last piece of his armor that he had. He hadn't earned his sigil, and he hadn't earned his jetpack, and by returning and protecting the child and all that stuff, she felt that he had earned those things. So she gives him those. Then they leave the enclave, and they leave the armorer there, and they go escape through this underneath, through this area that has an underground lava river that takes them out through this tunnel that will escape them out to the outskirts of town. The armorer stays, and a bunch of stormtroopers come in to chase her, chasing them through the tunnels, and find her in the enclave, and she's just there by herself, and there's like 5 stormtroopers that come in, and she like jacks all of those dudes up. She uses her forging tool. She has like a hammer and a I don't know what the other one is. It's like a blade or something, and she just like beats those dudes down hard. And so then the rest of our heroes escape into this lava river, and there's like a boat there that they have to dislodge and float down the lava river. And there's like one of the cool elements that happens in this scene is there's a boat pilot that sits in there. It's a droid. It's an astromech droid that looks kind of like R2-D2, but it's red. And he's like encrusted in old lava, and they don't know if it still works or not. And when they get the boat flowing, that droid springs to life and starts whirring and beeping and whatever, and then it chunks its way out of the lava, and then it stands up, and you see that it has these like almost like IG-11. It has these like long arms and long legs, even though the body is like an astromech body, and it has a big pole like a gondolier, and it rows the boat down the lava river. It's like a ferry droid. But I just thought it was a really cool design. When it comes to Star Wars, I'm big into the droids. They're like one of my favorite things about Star Wars. R2-D2 is my favorite Star Wars character, and I just love all the different droid designs. So I've really been loving IG-11 in this. And this droid, I don't know what it's called. I'm gonna have to look up its name, or if they ever make any figurines or anything, because I just thought the design was so cool, having those long legs and arms. But the astromech body I thought was cool. So anyway, they're flowing down this river, and they see the light at the end of the tunnel, literally. They're opening there, but the Mandalorian uses his scanners and finds that the outsides of the tunnel are being flanked by like a bunch of stormtroopers that are waiting there to ambush them all. And there's basically they're basically trying to stop. They try to tell the astromech gondolier thing to stop the rowing so that they can figure out what they're supposed to do, and he won't stop for whatever reason. He's not programmed to stop or something. And Cara Dune gets annoyed with him for not listening and blasts his head off. So that's the end of that gondolier droid, or whatever we want to call it. But even though she blasts him in an effort to get him to stop, the boat just keeps flowing down. So IG-11 realizes that the only way out of this situation is if he initiates his self-destruct sequence at the mouth of the tunnel, and explodes himself in his protocol to protect and nurse the child. And he does all the calculations of the odds or whatever, and he surmises that the only way to continue to protect the child and everybody else there and fulfill his programming is to destruct himself, because there's no other way out of that situation that ends with IG-11 still being alive. So he hops out of the boat because he's metal and he can walk through the lava, and he just slowly walks out to the end of the tunnel before the boat reaches the end. And then all of these stormtroopers see him walk out, and he initiates his he has like a thermal detonator in this little chest chamber, and he initiates a self-destruct sequence, and then boom, all of those stormtroopers get blasted. And I think IG-11, I can't imagine there being some miracle of him being put back together. I think he's probably good and gone this time. I would be really, really surprised to see him involved in the future of the show at all, because he just gets obliterated and destroys all these droids in the process, or stormtroopers in the process. So all of our heroes end up flowing out to the end of the tunnel and hop out of the boat, and they're on the outskirts of town, and only to be greeted by Moff Gideon flying his TIE fighter up over the ridge, and he sees them walking around and starts shooting at him from the TIE fighter. And that's where you get this really cool sequence where the Mandalorian decides to fire up his jetpack for the first time and try to go fly up into the sky and tussle with Moff Gideon's TIE fighter. So he's able to, as the TIE fighter's flying by, he's able to launch his jetpack up with the right timing, that he can use a grappling hook thing to hook himself onto the flying TIE fighter, and then he gets on the wings and stuff, and there's this tense moment where Gideon's trying to shake him off and all that, and eventually the Mandalorian is able to hang on there long enough. I should start calling him by his name now that he has one, because it's somewhat annoying to keep calling him the Mandalorian. Din Djarin is able to get these detonator things stuck to the wing of the TIE fighter, and then he flies off. He lets go and gently lands with the jetpack, and the wing explodes off of the TIE fighter, and the TIE fighter crashes. And so then he reunites with everybody else on the ground, with the child and Cara Dune and Greef Karga, and they kind of have a little discussion about what's going to happen next. Karga tells him he, fully initiated back into the Bounty Hunters Guild now that he's back in charge again, and it looks like all the threats have been eliminated off of Navarro. He also enlists Cara Dune to stay with him to be his enforcer. He asks her if she wants to be his enforcer, and she agrees to that, to stay on Navarro with him and be an enforcer. The Mandalorian probably would like to take the job at some point to be back in the Bounty Hunter and hang out with these people on this planet, but he has other pressing matters of taking the child out into the galaxy and finding out where the baby comes from and where he belongs and what his people are and all that stuff, which I'm sure will be the meat of season 2 of this, is to find out the adventures of him trying to figure out where this child is supposed to go. So I'm very excited about that. And it seems like, at least for the time being, all's well that ends well. That everybody's going to be able to get up and running again and all of that stuff. But right at the end of the episode, we see this little coda where there is a group of Jawas that are out in the desert, and they're trying to take apart Moff Gideon's crashed TIE fighter and salvage it for parts. And then we see a blade cut through the hull of the ship, and then Moff Gideon steps out, and he has in his hand the Darksaber, which, if you were confused when you were watching this, like, what is this black thing, a vibrating sword looking deal? It's kind of like a lightsaber, but not, and it's black, and I don't know. This is an ancient Mandalorian weapon called the Darksaber, and if you want to know more about the Darksaber, there's some stuff that talks about it in the last couple seasons of the Clone Wars, and it's heavily involved in Star Wars Rebels, which I haven't watched all of, but I know about some of the details of that. So, just like I was saying before with some of the things they hint at, and this big thing, if you've heard about people freaking out about the Darksaber or freaking out about this final scene, and you don't understand what all the hubbub is, or you kind of want to understand more, I'm telling you, this show is beckoning you to come deeper and deeper into the Star Wars rabbit hole. You thought you didn't want to watch those other shows, you didn't know if the Clone Wars animated series or Rebels were for you, or if you were interested or not. Well, if you really like this Mandalorian show, and you want to know more about what's going on, and you want to know why people are freaking out about the details that are being revealed in this show, come with us. Come deeper into the realm of Star Wars nerdery. Watch the Clone Wars. Watch Star Wars Rebels. They're all on Disney+, so you have them at your fingertips. If you already have access to The Mandalorian, you have access to Rebels, Clone Wars, Resistance, all of that stuff. So that's what they're inviting you to do. Come deeper, become a bigger Star Wars nerd than you already are, because these things are heavily connected, and that's what I'm planning on doing. In the meantime, we have, I think, at least until fall to wait for more Mandalorian to occur. In the meantime, within the first couple of months of 2020, they're going to be releasing a final episode, or a final season, rather, of the Clone Wars, because that show was sort of like prematurely canceled. Disney Plus has ordered a seventh season of the Clone Wars, so they're going to be adding to that in the next couple of months. So I'm sure there will be some, details in there as well. That'll be a nice addition to get you tied you over until more Mandalorian happens. And then also, if you're like me and you haven't fully caught up on the end of Clone Wars or Rebels, that's what I'm going to be doing next to tide me over until more Mandalorian. So I would recommend that you do the same if this is something you're really interested in. They're right there on Disney Plus. Give them a watch, see what you think. It'll probably fill you in on a lot more of these details, what all these connections are, and so on. It's not going to like fully answer all of your questions, but if you want to know a lot more about what's going on, there is a lot more in those two shows, particularly about the Mandalorians and the Vizslas, Death Watch, the Dark Saber, all of that kind of stuff. So that is, what Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau are clearly beckoning you to do. So, and Disney, because they got more content coming out. So that's what's up with that. Really awesome finale to the series. The episode 7 and 8 are sort of like a nice big piece that kicks the end. There's no B story. There's no standalone adventure in this. It's really all just the meat of the A plot, if you want to so to speak. And I loved the way that this ended. Really cool moments with IG-11, who was a character I really liked, and seeing some cool droid stuff, and huge exposition dumps about details about all the characters, learning that our main protagonist's name is Din, and some stuff about Greef Karga and Cara Dune and all of that stuff. And even though many of our questions weren't answered about the child, it also points you in a direction of hope that's clearly what season 2 is going to be all about, and finding out more about where he comes from and all that stuff. And I'm really excited when they get around to that. I think, like I said, they hinted that fall is their timetable for that. So thanks as always for watching these. This is my last video of the season. Wrapping that up, I'll put it on a playlist on my channel so you can watch all of my reactions to the entire season of season 1 of The Mandalorian if you'd like. They'll stay up there. And thanks as always for watching these. I hope you've really been enjoying these, following along as I watch the show, or we watch the show together, and talking about it and detailing it together. So I hope this was informative, magical, entertaining, all of that stuff. Thanks for liking, commenting, and subscribing. Let me know if you enjoyed the finale, if you have any comments about that, or if you know any details about deeper Star Wars lore, if you've seen more of Rebels than I have, or all that stuff. I'm planning on catching up on that. I really am. I've got it on Disney Plus. It's very high on my queue of things to do. So I'll be doing that in the meantime, and continuing to watch original content on Disney Plus as it comes out. I'll keep doing videos about those, and hopefully you've been enjoying that too. I hope you have an excellent start to your new year, and until I make another one of these, bye-bye.